All right, our next clip is Scotty Bessent. He's our Treasury Secretary, probably one of the best ones we've ever had. And he's talking about the tariffs and the Supreme Court ruling. And let's listen to what he has to say. Because obviously the media is like, it's the end of the world. What Trump is doing. So what you got to understand about tariffs is that back in the day, like especially in the 1980s and after the 1970s, when Nixon made a deal with the Chinese to kind of pull them away from the Russians, they figured, hey, you know what? We'll do business deals with them, and eventually they'll moderate and get away from communism, which, that turned out to be totally wrong. And so what the Chinese did, because they think in terms of decades, they want to rule. And they believe it's their destiny to rule the world. And one of the ways that they do that is to get the West to hollow out its industry. And so, what the Chinese communists would do is they would give their steel producers money and basically help finance their steel. And so, they would have government subsidized steel sent over and sold in the United States. And so, it's being sold for cheaper than we can make it for. And so, that basically hollows out our steel industry. As a matter of fact, 5, 6 months ago, the last couple of steel plants in the UK were bought by a Chinese company. And what did they do? They shut the plants down. Because if China's going to go to war and you basically depend on them to make all the steel that you buy and you no longer can make it yourself, and they start a war with you, they cut you off from steel. So how can you build cars? How can you build ships? How can you build planes if you can't even make your own steel anymore? And so from a strategic perspective, that is what the Chinese have been doing. They've done that across the board. And so when Trump puts a tariff on, say, let's take an example for steel, which he did in the first administration. He said, you gotta, that you guys need to be on a level playing field. Because if we allow you to send your steel into our country cheaper than we can make it for, you're going to bankrupt our companies and you're going to put our people out of business. And then we buy your steel, we send you our cash, and then we get your stuff. That cash leaves circulation in our economy, which reduces the money supply and circulation in our economy. And that causes, when the money supply contracts, the economy contracts. And so what Trump does, he uses this for negotiation. He says, I'm slapping on a 50% tariff on steel or your car or pharmaceuticals, whatever it happens to be, because he wants to make it more expensive to make things overseas and make it cheaper to make it here. And so that's why during the State of the Union the other night, Trump was saying how he's got about 18 trillion in investment because of all the last year of the tariffs that he's used to negotiate and basically bully these companies into returning to the United States and opening plants here. So it hires American workers, it pays American workers, and the American workers spend their money in our economy, which keeps the money supply stable and keeps the economy stable. So that's why he's doing these things. But again, the media, most of these people don't understand this stuff at all. And of course, they hate Trump. So you're not going to get the truth out of them at all. So let's hear what Scotty has to say.
I would also like to take a moment to address today's Supreme Court ruling, and I would note that I did not change a single word in my speech post the ruling. President Trump will always put our national security and Americans first. And as I have said before, the president has multiple tools in his toolbox. Let's be clear about what today's ruling was and what it wasn't. Despite the misplaced gloating from Democrats, ill-informed media outlets, and the very people who gutted our industrial base, the court did not rule against President Trump's tariffs. 6 justices simply ruled that IEEPA authorities cannot be used to raise even $1 of revenue. This administration will invoke alternative legal authorities to replace the IEEPA tariffs. We will be leveraging Section 232 and Section 301 tariff authorities that have been validated through thousands of legal challenges. Treasury's estimates show that the use of Section 122 authority, combined with potentially enhanced Section 232 and Section 301 tariffs, will result in virtually unchanged tariff revenue in 2026. And with
Pretty simple and straightforward. So does that make sense? I mean, the explanation, do you understand why we do the tariffs? But also
Yeah.
the chaos. If you read The Art of the Deal, it, the Trump says things that are outrageous and chaotic and absurd. He does it on purpose. That's part of his negotiation tactic. The people in the media freak out. Oh, he's lost his mind. He's unhinged. But that's part of the negotiation process because he asks for things that he knows he's never going to get. And that creates a starting point because he can always walk it back. And so that's what he's doing. He's doing it so to make it so it's cheaper for the companies to come back to the United States and manufacture their stuff here. Because the important thing to understand about that, and if you guys watched the documentary that we did several years ago called Economic Prosperity for All, again, if our people get fired and the manufacturing plant closes, and we buy the stuff from people overseas, our money leaves our economy and it goes to their country and their economy. And so, under normal circumstances, if our workers are being paid in the United States, those workers spend their money at local restaurants. They spend it at the grocery store. They spend it at the gas station. They buy American cars or whatever they happen to do, and the money stays circulating in our economy. When it leaves, the only way it comes back is when they come over here to buy your house in foreclosure for 60, 70 cents on the dollar because you lost it because you lost your job. And so this is why Trump is doing this. Is, the other thing when you look at like during World War II, the Liberty ships, which were the freighters that we used to ship men and material over to Europe, we reportedly, when Hitler saw the data that we were building and launching Liberty ships faster than the Germans could sink them with their U-boats, Hitler's response was, "Oh, we've lost the war." Because he knew it was a war of logistics. If your adversary can make more boats than you can sink, then you're eventually going to get overwhelmed with men and material, and that's exactly what happened. But, when you look at the shipbuilding capacity that the Chinese have and we have now, I mean, there's something like 200 times more shipbuilding capacity than we have. So that's a problem because they can make ships for their navy and have a dominant navy that basically, whoever controls the seas controls commerce. And it's much better to have the United States being the 800-pound gorilla in the block versus the Chinese communists, because the Chinese communists, they basically believe it's their destiny to rule the world at this point. So that's why they finance and fund anything that weakens our society. The average person thinks, oh, we're just doing business deals with the Chinese. It's like they're very strategic. Not only the United States, but again, they did the same thing with Great Britain, where they bought the last remaining company that made steel. And you think, oh, they're going to probably bring new equipment in. They're going to modernize the plant. No, they fucking shut it down. So now the UK doesn't have any, I think their last plant is now closed or is going to be closing. They can't even make steel anymore. Well, how can you build a navy? How can you build anything? You're dependent on somebody else. And so if the Chinese ever go to war with the West and most of the West can't produce steel, they're not going to be able to fight for very long. So it's strictly strategic and financial, and that's why he's doing these things. But again, everybody in the media leans left. They want communism, and that's why they're sympathetic to what the Chinese are doing. And unfortunately, the people that still watch that legacy news are totally getting misinformed. They're uninformed and they're misinformed. They're literally victims of fake news, and they don't even know it.
That's why you gotta trust but verify.
Trust but verify. That's what I love about Twitter, is because if something's bullshit, within 24 hours, a community note's going to appear on it with links and data that will refute that.